In this video, we're going to continue the logic for our shop. I've gone ahead and I moved my player down to this cavern so that when I hit play, we're right here. So let's take a look at what we want to do next. Currently, we can trigger our shop, and one thing that we might want to do is leave our shop. So when we go to the right, we can then X out of our shop. So to do that, all we have to simply do is use onTriggerExit and do the same process. So if we open up our shop script here, we can then add onTriggerEnter. So we can say private void onTriggerExit, and we're going to do the exact same logic. Detect other, which is our player. So here, if other.tag is player, then what it needs to happen. So if other.tag is player, then we want to say shop panel .setActive is going to be false. That's going to turn it off. We can save this, head back into Unity, let it compile and run it, and we should have a functioning enable and disable system. What we're going to want to do next now is update the UI info for the shop. So here we enter the shop and I leave it. Good, works exactly as we want. Now when we do this, what happens to our 54G down here? That needs to reflect our current gold value. So to do that, we're going to have two systems here. We have the shop, which handles the logic related to the shop. And then we're going to have a UIManager that's going to handle updating the UI for our game, including the shop. So let's go ahead and we're going to create a UIManager that's going to be responsible for updating this graphic. And the shop is going to communicate to it. So it's going to say, hey, the player entered the shop, give me the updated info. So let's go ahead and create a UIManager. So within our scripts here, let's create a new folder, and let's call it UI. And this UI folder is going to have scripts for all of our UI things, such as our main menu code, as well as things like our HUD display code. So within here, we're going to create a new C# script called UIManager. So we have UIManager. And let's go ahead and open this up. And we're going to turn this into a singleton so that our shop script can easily access it. So to do that, we need to first create an instance variable that's going to run along all classes. So it's going to be static. So private static UIManager _ instance. And then we are going to create a property to access that instance from any class. So public static UIManager capital instance. And this is going to be a property that's going to have a get, and we don't need a set. It's just going to get the instance and it's going to return it. So it's going to say get and then return _ instance. Now we only want to return the instance if it's not null. So we want to make sure that it exists. So here, if _instance equals null, we're going to throw in an exception. We want to say throw new exception, throw new Unity exception. And this is just going to cause an error basically in the editor. So here, throw new Unity exception, or we could even do a debug.log error. So if instance equals null, we can say debug.log error. And this is just to say, hey, the UIManager is null and hasn't been assigned. So UIManager is null. If it's not null, then we're going to return the instance. And the way it becomes not null is we use void awake. So in void awake, we say _instance equals this script, this instance of it. So now this UIManager, let's head back into Unity. It's going to live on our canvas. It's going to be responsible for all of our UI. So on the UIManager, select our canvas and drag the UIManager script to it. Now that it has a UIManager, we can update information and our shop can easily access it. So when we open that shop, we want to update the gems. So to do that, we need a reference to the gems. So let's go ahead and create a variable to grab those gems, or a variable reference to those gems, the text component. So here we're going to have, and if we look at it, let's go ahead and open up our shop panel. Here we have player gem count. It's a image component right now. And then within it is a text component. So we want that text component so that we can overwrite it with however many gems our player actually has. So to get a handle on this, it's a text component, and then we can drag it in the inspector. So let's go ahead and create a public text field. And if I type public text, you'll see that there's no text component. That's because we need to use the Unity Engine UI system. So here we're going to say using unityengine.ui, and that namespace is going to give us access to the UI library. So once we have that, we can then say public text, and let's call this, we'll call this gem count. So player gem count, and let's call it text so we know. All right, player gem count text. We'll save this. Let's go back into Unity, select our canvas. Let's select our canvas, and you'll see here that it has a text component, and we can simply drag it into the inspector. So now we have access to our player gem count. What we want to do now is basically tell the system, hey, update this player gem count text. So here we can save this, and we can have a function here that says open shop, for example. And when we open the shop, it's going to update all of the UI information that we want it to update. So let's create a function here called public void open shop. So when we call this method, what are we going to do? We need to say that the player gem count text dot text of that component is going to equal however many gems we have. So however many gems the player has. How do we know how many gems the player has? Well, this script isn't going to know. The whole point of a UI manager or a manager class in general is that scripts communicate with it. It doesn't handle any outside logic. So what we need to do is we need to pass that info to this script for it to make use of. So for instance, this open shop, we can create a parameter for it that's going to accept a gem count. And that's going to come from our shopkeeper because he knows if it's the player that collided with him, which means he can also get information such as the gem count of the player and pass it back here. So let's go ahead and make it so that our shop system can actually call this method and pass in the gem count of the player. So if we go back to the shop here, here's on trigger enter. We know that we collided with the player. And if we collide with the player, what we can do then is we can, before we even open the script or open the panel, is we can detect, hey, how many gems do you have by accessing the player component. So here, let's get a reference to the player component. It's going to equal other.getComponent player. Let's make sure it's not null. Make sure we do have the player component, otherwise it will break our game. So if player is not equal to null, meaning that we have it, then what do we want to check? We can simply call the shop manager. We can say UIManager.instance.openShop. And it looks like there is an error. Save this. Let's head back into the UI manager here. Okay, let's just save that real quick. So here we should say UIManager.instance. And it's not letting me do the instance here. Let's save this. Go to the UI manager. Oh, it is instant. I spelled instance wrong here. Instance. Save that. Go back to the shop. And here we have our UI manager.instance. And then here we have open shop. Now when I call that open shop, it's looking for an int value from our player. That's going to be the gem count. What is the current gem count of the player? So here I can say player.diamonds. And by saving this, that's going to then send information to the UI manager. And then from the UI manager, we can say the text equals however many, we can say however many gem counts. So we can say plus, it's a string, so we need to put quotes. We can append the gem count. And then once we have that, we want to include that little G. So we're going to say plus again, and we're going to include the capital G. So we're going to form a string here. So player gem count.text is going to equal this. So let's go ahead and save this and test it out. Let's select our player and see how many gems we currently have. So as of right now, our gem count is set to 0. Let's go ahead and walk into the shop, and it says 0 gems. I'm going to leave the shop. Let's change our value to 54. Let's go ahead and run back into the shop, and now we have 54 gems. So now that that's accurately reporting information, we are good to go with continuing on our shop. So in the next video, we're going to set up the logic for selecting an item to buy.